Welcome to Lawyers Who Learn, where we explore how attorneys' engagement and lifelong learning fuels their growth. Join us to uncover these journeys and gain insights for your legal career.
Richard, welcome to Lawyers Who Learn. You are the Captain Compliance, as you can see in your logo behind you. I'm excited to dive into that story and share a little bit more of your journey today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We had a little bit of a miscommunication in the beginning. You are from Florida. I'm in New York. Turns out you're in New York now. I'm in New York. If I saw your email yesterday, this would have been potentially in person, but it will be just as good to do it in this form. We've had calls before. One of the reasons being your team has done courses on Lawline on data privacy and compliance, which is an area that you guys focus on. And certainly we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But if you want to really learn about what's happening in data compliance and what's going on, you can watch a CLE course. Really what I'm interested in is your entrepreneur journey, your serial entrepreneur journey, and how you ended up being a legal tech entrepreneur as not an attorney. So you have quite a story. And so we're going to dive into a little bit of all of that. So does that sound good to you?
Sounds great. And hopefully next time we'll do it in person.
As I said to you in the beginning, and I was recently dubbed the chaos interviewer, where I don't go on a linear path. And sometimes I start with this question, and it might actually take us on a completely different path. You speak a lot, you've been around the block, and I'm sure a lot of people ask you questions about your career and your success. Is there something that you don't get to talk enough about when you think about your learning and growth journey, or you're not asked about, that really, if you had more time, or if somebody put you on the spot like this, just sparks in your head right now that, oh, this is something that actually is less known about who I am or where I've got to? And if not, that's fine. We can go back to the linear path, but sometimes that sparks a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's funny actually. There is a time that I hark back to in 2008, 2009. I was finishing college. I was the ultimate poor college student at the time. At one point even had negative money in my bank account. And I remember I had a friend who was nice enough to just help pay my going out expenses, or we went to a Miami Heat basketball game. And I never forget, there was a time we were walking in downtown Miami in early 2009, and at that point there was a lot of homeless people just sitting all around in Miami. And I remember thinking at the time, I'm not that much different financially at this point than the people right here that are homeless and everything. And I had an internship, and I was starting to perfect my skills and learn, at that time, digital marketing, which has led to all these other things in my life. But I always think back to that, like, that wasn't that long ago. That's not ancient history. That's only 15, 16 years ago, being at that point to where I am today. So I try to stay grounded in my roots and just in my lifestyle and my thought patterns, and just being really responsible, knowing that I've come a long way in a fairly short period of time.
Just to be clear, so 15, 16 years ago, you're saying you had no money in your bank account?
There was actually a trick I had. I had an internship. I think they were paying me $225 a week or so. And
How
I
old were you?
I
Not to give away your
was,
age now, but
yeah, in my early 20s.
okay.
And if I went to my ATM and let's say I had $35 in my account, I could go ahead and do a withdrawal for 400, and it would say, "Oh, this is more than your balance," and you could actually take out, like, have negative equity in your account.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting. Okay.
yeah, so when I needed money, I remember doing things like that for a period of time until I really started to get on my feet, which took about another year or so, and then things really started to ramp up from there.
Which certainly is a common story after college. Depending on what situation is, people have little or no money in their account, in what they're trying to do and where they want to become. What let's we're going to go back there, but let's just talk for one moment. What year did you found Captain Compliance?
Yeah, I guess in our non-linear journey, it goes from I was working at a hedge fund. I learned digital marketing skills, used that to create a digital online reputation or management company. So we helped, if there was something unwanted on the internet, we would either force it down in the search results or replace it completely. And one of those services was data privacy removal. So if we were to Google somebody's name plus their city, we could remove their home address and personal information for their family and themselves. And because of that one service, that eventually, as these data privacy laws started to come to light and some players in the space had raised money in data privacy and started making headlines, that's when my eyes opened to the possibility of data privacy software and the growing need for it. So in 2023, I had an exit and sold my agency and said, I want to dive into data privacy software and captain compliance. Found the name, love the alliterative nature of it, that it's memorable. And for me, it says, here's a team of people that are on your side and we're going to be protecting your business. And that's our job, almost like a superhero theme that took me back to that cartoon that you may have watched as a kid, Captain Planet. Like just initially, that's what came to my mind. And in 2023, I interviewed about 180 some odd people, ended up founding the initial team in late July of 2023, started building in August of 2023, and took about 13, 14 months of initial building of our software and started onboarding clients late summer of last year. And that's the initial story of Captain Compliance.
So again, just trying to make this like going through, you said 2008 or so was when you started. Was that around that time that you said 2008, 2006?
2008, 2009.
Yeah, 2009. I'm going to pause. To me, this is feeling too interviewy. And I really want to, and this might even stay in the interview. I just want to have a conversation because you're an awesome guy and I'm trying to weave too much to it. And like, the reason I wanted to interview you was you started, like you said, you had nothing. You started your first business after working at the hedge fund. Is that correct?
Yeah. So when I was at the hedge fund, actually the fun story is I had a mentor. He ran the Bank of Palm Beach, West Palm Beach, and
Go ahead. Go ahead.
super friendly guy. I was like, do I go get an MBA? What do I do with my life from here after college? Like, how do I become successful? I was formerly a valet and valet parking very successful people's cars and saying, how do I continue on a path to where they are versus just being a service worker in that realm for the rest of my life, where my whole life would depend on other people being generous to give me tips. And he said, you should be an intern, get your foot in the door somewhere. The great financial crisis was literally just kicking off. Lehman Brothers had just collapsed. And he was like, do something where you work for free even if you had to. And that's maybe one of the reasons I ended up with negative money at my account because I wasn't working and getting paid for the first few months. But he's take that advantage because after you graduate, like you're just like anybody else who needs a job and everybody else is on the street right now. There's massive layoffs happening. And that's when I made a list of every single company in South Florida that I could possibly apply for and end up being an old friend that I grew up with. His uncle ran a hedge fund in Boca where I went to school. And he was like, I can contact him and see if he'll give you an internship. And at the time, he was like, I really don't have something specific in trading. But he's like, I'm putting money into this startup and we're doing like online classified ads for consignment shops and estate sales. And you could learn this SEO and SEM thing. And at the time, I had no idea what those words even meant. That was like my intro to it, coming from having no background into it to just paying my dues. And that's what led to me learning that, developing a skill, which then eventually led to this cascading effect years down the road that is still having positive net benefits.
Wow, that's a great story. So two things that stood out. So just so I understand, how long were you working at that firm before you were getting paid?
2008, I started, and it wasn't until St. Patrick's Day, I remember, maybe that was my luck, of 2009. It was about 6 months or so of working and no income and living off of, I remember I would live off of rice. So I always remember this story I read from Mark Cuban. There was a point in his journey where he was living off ketchup and mustard sandwiches. So all you could afford was bread, and he'd go and he'd get packets of ketchup and mustard and he'd put that on the buns and he would eat that. And that's what he lived on for a while. And my version of that was rice. And I remember my mom came down to visit and bought a giant bag of frozen shrimp and some rice. And I lived on that. And I lived on rice and frozen shrimp and would cook that. And then whatever at the office, leftovers or food, when they would feed me, was how I survived for a few months.
So how long were you working as a car attendant?
The car attendant was from 2005 to 2008. So it was right before I started with the internship that I was there. And then that was great because it paid for all my for my school and education. I graduated with no debt, which was nice. But then on the other hand, I wasn't taking out student loans to have capital to live on.
What an amazing story that you were like this is what you in the movies, right? Like you work as a car attendant and you talk to a lot of people who are successful, and then you say, what should I do? And then someone gives you advice and they say, right now, this is the Great Recession, get a job somewhere. It's very competitive. You're not going to be able to get paid. But if you get your foot in the door, you show that you add value, it will work out correctly. And you took that leap of faith to do that. And 6 months of working without a paycheck, which I don't know if would be allowed today but you were working full time or you're working part time.
When I wasn't in class, I was there.
Yeah. So and then what happened? How did you get your first paycheck? What was the
I
conversation?
said, hey, I'm struggling here. Like, I got to eat. I can't keep living on these leftovers and everything. And so they were like, okay. And they were like, all right, we're going to pay you. And they wanted to pay me like 125. It was something really small. And I was like, I need at least like 200. So 225, I think it was I think it was 225 a week, $900 a month was what I was starting to get paid. And I was like, and at the time, nominal amount of money, even back then, but it was like just such a something like, okay, at least there's something starting to come in.
Once you started getting paid, how long were you there for?
So I was there till the last day of February 2011. So eventually I did get a job on the trading floor, and I would come in at 7:30 in the morning and work till 7:30 at night. And I'd work in the morning on the startup, then I'd go to the trading floor. And then after the trading day, I'd go back and work on the startup.
Who were you working with on the trading floor? That was a different organization?
No, same thing. So the office was shared. The hedge fund manager had a software he was building for their muni bond division,
Got it.
and used that developer and said, "Hey, I have these other ideas of things I want to build." Right? Everybody's got other ideas, and then all of a sudden somebody comes into their life and says, "Hey, I'm a builder. I can do this." So then he did that, and then I popped into his life and said, "Hey, I'm looking for an internship." And he's actually, I've been wanting to build this. This is like
Got
fortuitous.
it.
So that's how it all came
So what were
together.
you doing on the trading floor?
Originally, I was a prop desk trader trading equities, and I tried my hand at that. I wasn't a successful prop desk trader in the day trading aspect. We did some swing trading, which
Did you get your license while you weren't getting paid? Is that what you were in school for?
no, I was actually in school for economics and finance. Being a hedge fund, we didn't need to do licensing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but I still eventually wanted to get a CFA and go through Series 7, 63, and all that.
Yeah. Okay.
That was the long-term plan, but it ended up being that I was good at the marketing stuff I was doing for the startup, and that was gaining some traction, which that company eventually got acquired. It wasn't a big number or anything, but it showed like traction and people saw my success in it. And then
Which company got acquired?
the estate sale and consignment classified ad business.
That's the one you were interning at.
That was the one I was interning and building up. Yes.
That you were saying it wasn't, you didn't have any equity in it. Obviously, you were just
Didn't have
helping.
any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So then it gets sold and you stay at that organization helping trade, you're saying?
Helping to trade, and we had tried swing trading, which was actually successful, but the manager wasn't.
What is swing trading?
Swing trading is where instead of just doing trades intraday, it's more 2 to 10 days. So we'd buy something. It's funny, I remember buying stocks like Success Factors, Netflix back in 2010 and early 11, and buying it, and it would go up 20% and selling it. And I'm thinking, wow.
How much money were you working with?
I don't remember the exact numbers, but
Okay.
I remember there was the General Motors IPO, I believe it was. And like on that day, like the fund made like $1 million in trading and the IPO and doing that.
Yeah.
But I don't remember the exact amount of like shares and dollar amounts.
It's such an interesting thing because a person that you're not paying really in the beginning to be an intern, then you're going to trust them to trade money on the floor. What did you have to show, or what did you learn, or to get that trust to do that from them not even wanting to pay you for 6 months? Like, it's a big responsibility to do that.
Yeah, I always say I was paying my dues, right? I was showing that I'm willing to work hard. I'm really willing to put in the time, even if it was something I wasn't initially passionate about, but to get onto that trading floor, right? And ironically, I got on the trading floor and then realized, hey, actually, I like the marketing and the internet aspect better than the trading. The trading is something I thought I wanted to do, and I think that's a case in a lot of
Got
people.
it.
They come to the world. You see it, right? A lot of people say, oh, I want to become a lawyer. They go to law school, then they go into the office, they start working, billing hours, and then they realize, wait, there's so many other things I can do with a law degree.
Almost every legal tech entrepreneur I've interviewed on this podcast, either the first month they knew it wasn't the right fit for them, or like some of the PD professionals who work in professional development for big law, they were literally like going on their first job because they wanted to go to law school. And then they're like, oh, maybe I'll just be in legal adjacent instead of law, be a lawyer itself. And they stayed in that career because they like the HR side of it, not the actual wanting to practice and have to go to school. Yeah, that's super familiar area. Okay, you realized you like the kind of the entrepreneur side. Well, now what happens next?
Yeah, so it's actually funny because I think a lot of these things just happen by accident. I had a friend who saw I was doing SEO, saw I was doing marketing, was successful with it, started my own brand on the side, and he said to me, like, we should start something. And I was like, look, I'm at work from 7:30 in the morning to 7-ish at night. I go home, I eat my rice, and then I get on the computer and I do my own work. I barely have any time. I was like, all right. I was like, look, I was like, let me think about it. So I posted an ad on Craigslist for SEO services at the time, and there was a diagram that was built out of all these different ways to build links and to create content that could be beneficial for rankings. And I posted it, and then nothing happened, right? Don't even think about it.
Posted an ad for people to hire you.
To hire us,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
for SEO services, but I put his phone number on there because I
Got
was
it.
at work all day. And I'm at work one day and my phone keeps ringing and I'm like, hey, like I'm at work. I can't talk. It's grind time. And he says, I need your help. I'm like, what's up? Everything okay? He goes, yeah. He goes, we have our first client, but I have no idea what to say. He had no idea about anything. And I'm like, wait, what do you mean? And he's, did you post this thing online? They sent this. And I was like, yeah, I posted that 2 months ago. I was like, wait, somebody just now is calling about it. So I was
That's
like,
so funny.
I was like, all right, tell them on my break tomorrow, I will call them. And they were a local South Florida company. I think they were in the debt settlement space for debt consolidation. And I showed them from my internship, the work I had done there, my own project. So I already had a small portfolio that was starting to grow. And they were super impressed. And they were our first client at $1,500 a month. I was ecstatic at first. And I was like, okay. And then used that, had a little bit of extra money. I think we spent most of the money on the client the first couple months just to make sure they were really successful and happy. And then posted a couple more Craigslist ads and got two more clients from Craigslist initially. So I thank Craig Newmark and Craigslist for getting us started. And then that led to the opportunity to create Profile Defenders, which was the reputation repair. And speaking like an attorney, it was almost like we were a criminal defense attorney in some cases, where we would go and we would help people who, like one of our first clients was a college student who his roommate, their dorm got raided and it ended up in like the local school paper and was having trouble getting a job because of it. So it's almost like we came in to expunge it and created good content around that. And then we said, okay, this is a business model. We can create a business around reputation repair and started that in March of 2011 and then just kept reinvesting the money and it compounded pretty quickly. It was about a $500 initial investment for the website and by December of that first year we were doing about 90 grand a month. So I went from having negative money a year and a half before that to having $90,000 coming in 1 month. So things started to progress pretty fast. And then eventually I used that money to start a handful of other businesses in my journey, which eventually has led me here today to Captain Compliance.
Sometimes the linear story is actually worth getting into, and I really appreciate that versus jumping around. So, several questions from what you just described. First of all, Craig Newmark and Craigslist. I was a real estate broker before this career, and I got so many clients from posting my listings on there. So yes, and it didn't cost a dime, so it was amazing. So I really appreciated that as well. So the profile defenders, can't read my own handwriting. Was that because one person reached out to you and said, I have this issue, can you help me? And then you tried that and you realized it seems like SEO would be a bigger business than profile defenders. So I'm just curious why you went to that niche.
It just happened. It happened by kind of accident. It wasn't like the SEO was this one thing. I was doing a couple clients, and then there was two different businesses we were looking at and thinking about doing. One was Facebook used to have wishes. You could buy wishes or something along those lines, and it was a model where I think we were going to be a reseller of these wishes or something like that, or offer to help people improve the amount of wishes they get. And I want to say within a year or two, Facebook had canceled that whole operation or for whatever reason. So I remember we looked back and said, well, good thing we didn't start that because we would have potentially got off to a hot start and then got that shut down. But yeah, it was because somebody came, actually not even me, to my friend, and I needed the help. And then he came to me. And that's what started it. And then there was another company also in South Florida they were a commercial debt collector. I think Office Depot was their biggest client. And they were on the site called a ripoff report, which used to rank really high. And they just like couldn't for the life of them get it down.
I remember that site, and we had issues too with like really terrible people writing terrible things that were lies. And it was hard to get ripoff report made it very hard to get it off.
Yeah.
So you figured out how to get it off of there?
So the Communications Decency Act says that anybody can post anything on a site, and the actual web operator who owns the site isn't liable for what somebody else has posted, right? And there's been a ton of back and forth on this, even in the government today, on whether or not they should keep that immunity up or not. And Ed, the founder of Ripoff Report, knew this and was like, I will let people post the most egregious, untruthful things. He didn't care. And he said, people will try to sue me and I'll counter sue and I'll win. And I go on this free speech rant, but it really was a horrible extortion site at the end of the day. And
essentially had to pay him to take it off. Is what
in the end, he eventually started letting people pay him in kind of edge cases to remove it. And then eventually Google, I guess, I just assume somebody at Google or something happened. Somebody said, hey, you guys got to do something about this. This has been far too long. And now the site like doesn't rank or show up at all anymore.
Got it. Wow. That's interesting. So when did you feel comfortable enough to leave your full-time job to do this?
Yeah, so I was given an option, and I always say this was one of the best advices I ever got. It was the end of February 2011, and I was just starting on the SEO was getting going, and I was just about to start the Profile Defenders brand. And my boss sat down with me and showed me like, here's the feedback you get from your colleagues. It was two girls I worked with, and they were things that in some businesses would be great, right? You're very friendly with the clients, you're too personable with them, you need to be strictly business, things like that. And he said, look, at the end of the day, like muni bond trading, like it's probably not for you. You can stay here if you want a job, but don't stay. I don't pay you that much. Like the growth potential is only so much right now. We don't know what's going to happen in the markets. And he said, but some butterflies are meant to spread their wings and fly, not be locked up in a cage. And he said, I feel like I'm holding you back. And he said, why don't you think about it over the weekend, what you want to do? And I thought about it and I was like, how am I going to survive? What am I going to do? I was going to go back to school actually to get my accounting degree and have a CPA and then use that kind of like how lawyers, right, use their law degree. Similar for accounting was the idea. And I came back and said, I think I'm going to go off my own and I'll figure out my path. And that was the best advice and thing that ever happened to me because then that gave me both the time, the bandwidth, and capacity to start really building and going and seeing what I could do on my own. And because I didn't have a lot of money even at that point, I was able to take more chances. And actually, maybe it's still in my DNA because even today, right, I sold a business that was producing great cash flow and then have piled a ton of money into captain compliance and my time and effort. And that's now with two children doing it. So I guess it's still in my DNA that I'm taking chances and risks. I guess it's that unfunded belief that I have in myself. And
you hear that over and over again, right? Elon Musk is a great example. Someone who just keeps doubling. He could have had a happy life and retired a long time ago. And there's lots of people who just keep just doubling down and putting it all in. Let me ask you this, because that's really great. I like getting those nuggets so people can think about them. Some butterflies, you said, were meant to spread their wings and fly.
Not be locked in a cage. Yep.
So how can somebody right now who is a potential budding entrepreneur who wants to get into legal tech or a practicing attorney who potentially has ideas, How do they know? And obviously you were forced in that situation because it didn't seem like that was really an option to stay based on the way he said that. But now with your experience, how would you give advice to somebody else in that in that area? Because it's really, you can't just jump off the cliff and start something. And what are some of the things you learned during that process that would help others?
Yeah, it definitely helps to have one foot out and already starting on something. I was clearly unhappy and it wasn't for me when I was at the fund. So that obviously helped. And I'm sure my demeanor probably was showing that. But having the little bit of business I was already starting to do and a little bit of momentum already was really helpful. So that's one thing I would say in the little bit of extra time. If you're actually serious about it, you'll stay up late, you'll work on it. Some people say, hey, I have kids, I got a family, I come home, I eat dinner, and then I'm exhausted, I go to sleep. If you really want it, you'll make the time just to start. Even if it's a little website, you start posting some content, you start seeing, you're watching webinars, just any sort of initial learning and due diligence is really important. So I always say I would do that before you jump off the cliff. Making the leap is, I just read a really cool Yale case study about entrepreneurs and after they sell their business, like what do they do? Like they're lost. And it says just sit tight for 6 months because you go from having a business and everybody needs you, you got emails, you got responsibilities, and all of a sudden you have nothing that you have to do. And then you have to find like a sense of purpose. So it's good to already start building that sense of purpose, in my opinion, if you're looking to make a leap from a 9 to 5 or a job that you already have and you want to get into legal tech and you're already in the legal world. And then you can actually see examples where it may be relevant if you're building like a case management software. If you're working in the legal world, okay, this would actually come in handy when you're actually doing day-to-day daily work. I find doing that and like the networking part is really important. Talking to other people in the space and learning before you dive in.
Legal tech is certainly having its moment right now. There's so many conferences. There's 3 this month: Relativity Fest, ClioCon. This is really the season for it, and there's more and more money. There's a legal tech fund. There's more and more money going to legal tech companies and more budding entrepreneurs. Yeah, and AI is certainly having what some people call it a bubble. Some people say everything's gonna change, and maybe they're somewhere in between. So yeah, and everybody is a budding entrepreneur and doing different things. Was there any books that helped you early on that have been a foundation for your success when you were first starting your business?
I used to love Grinding It Out by Ray Kroc. I remember reading that as a kid and then reading it as an adult. But How to Win Friends and Influence People is one of my favorites. I learned always to say people's name. They always appreciate that. That was one thing I really picked up. That was big. And then The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz is a really amazing book. I should probably pick it up and read it again now. Reading is to me is so important, and now I only really get to read when I fly. So I had my second child in January. It was in the longest periods I went without flying, and I'm happy to get back out on into the plains and read because the amount of wealth of knowledge that you can pick up in a little book for the cost is one of the best investments anybody can make.
I say that line all the time. For $15, you can change your life. It's unbelievable. And yeah, for me too. Like that's why I like to run or walk my dog, because I listen to the books when I can, and I do love reading too. But it seems like there's busyness and reading don't come together. But like every time you read, it gives you that moment to step back. And you mentioned saying people's name, How to Win Friends and Influence People, an amazing book, and how to say people's names. I will say now your nickname is called Chart because you're
Sure.
you're called Richard, but you end with a T, so your friends call you Chart because that's in their name. So I'm going to call you Chart for the rest of the interview to show that I really appreciate you.
Thank you,
And
David.
hopefully we
I
get there.
appreciate it.
Grinding It Out by Ray Kroc. I've never read that. I saw the movie on Netflix, which is awesome. Is it something, even at this stage of my career, you would recommend reading?
That's a good one. And historically, I must have got this book when I was like 9 or 10, the J. Willard Marriott book. And ironically, that whole book talks about everything before he starts Marriott, really. It doesn't have most of the Marriott journey. So for whatever reason, I had the Marriott and the Ray Kroc biography books as a kid. And I've exploded now in books and biographies that I've read since then. But
Biographies were my favorite thing to read always because it's the story, right? And it's what this podcast is right now. It's how did you go from somebody who's a car attendant to Captain Compliance. But every sorry, I just couldn't help myself.
I like it. Yeah.
And everything in between. What is the hard things about the hard things about? Like, what is the main takeaway there?
Just the grind in a startup life. And then when you have to make a decision that is between a bad choice and a horrible choice, and you have no choice, but you have to pick one, and there's not a great outcome, but you have to do it. That's the biggest takeaway that I took from that book.
It's a great point, and it's something that my dad, who's been a mentor to me as an entrepreneur for a long time, is the one area we would always talk about. Because when you don't make a decision, things block up behind that decision. And what he would say to me, he said, just know whatever decision you make in 50 years, it's not going to matter. In 10 years, it's just not going to matter. It's so inconsequential. And I use a phrase, good thing, bad thing, who knows? Because you might not have the outcome you want, and it might be considered quote unquote bad, but actually over the long term might be an amazing thing. So you don't label a situation as bad, even if it's not the decision that you want. Even to this moment, I say all this, I struggle making the hard decisions. I literally have a contract that I have to do, and I keep reading it over, and I have to sign it today. And I just struggle with that final component. So it's always a work in progress for me. But when I do make that decision, you just feel the weight off your shoulders, regardless of what it goes, because then you can move on to the next thing. So I appreciate that. Okay. Now you left the firm. See, now we went a little bit back and forth, but you left the firm.
Chaos theory.
No, but you have to a little bit, because it's like what makes you who you are. So you left the firm, you are doing this, and you mentioned something about selling the reputation management company, Profile Defenders, correct? When did that happen?
Yeah, and along the way, I start other things because it was more of a lifestyle business. There's only so much scale in the business, but I was looking to sell it initially I was looking at potential offers in late 2016, early 2017, and there was a small private equity company out of Utah that was interested, and they were going to bring in somebody from Nu Skin, which is one of the biggest companies in Salt Lake City, that had worked in branding there, and then another person who worked in I wouldn't say telecom, but MS managed service provider space. And I ended up taking a liking to the guy in the MSP space. And I said, look, this deal doesn't come to fruition, which it ultimately didn't. I'd be interested in bringing you in, building out an office, and really bringing you into the fold. And so I ended up doing that in 2017, took a backseat.
So you raised money.
Didn't raise money, just had brought him in. Somebody was going to buy into the company, and then they were going to recap the company, and then I would get the two bites of the apple kind of piece where I'd still retain equity. We'd grow the company, and then
You did not do that, though.
I did not do it, though. I ended up just hiring the CEO that they wanted to hire, because ultimately, yeah. So I said, we can do this. They say they're going to put money up, but they ended up not. There was a deadline. I said, if the deal's not closed by then, I'm not going to waste my time on this. So ended up bringing him in. We looked at selling the company in 2020, had an offer. COVID hits, deal ends up getting derailed, which ended up being fine, and ended up growing the company more for the next 2.5, 3 years, and then relisted the company in 2022. Had a couple buyers, some with different seller note options, and ended up getting a sought offer from a big private equity company, part of the Seidler equity family. So the Seidlers own LA Fitness and the San Diego Padres, and they invested in a company that dealt with commercial wiring and capabilities for commercial developments, and they had a really nice exit with that. I think a high 9-figure exit. And then they ended up saying, hey, like, this is interesting. Like, we see reputation management is like the future. Everybody's online. Like, this is a huge industry. So was able to work a deal with them to buy. And the CEO that I had brought on in 2017 is still with the company today, running things.
Wow. Love that story. So it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like 12, 13 years you had this company about. Yeah. So if I can recall, there's a couple major players in the space, LifeLock being one of them. What was the other ones?
LifeLock, which had bought Reputation Defender, and Reputation Defender had raised 70 some odd million. I bootstrapped the whole way, and I ended up having a more successful exit than Reputation Defender had. So I always like to point that out to people, the grit and grind of me versus somebody who, and actually it was a lawyer that started Reputation Defender and raised a bunch of money, had a way of doing things. It just wasn't necessarily as efficient, and I figured out a better, more efficient way to solve people's problems.
So certainly, obviously, you've piqued my interest. Do you share publicly what your revenue was, or do you share anything publicly to give a sense of the scale that you were able to grow the company from zero to something, just to give that sort of perspective? And if not, that's fine too. But I love entrepreneur journeys where you can understand a ballpark of where you were from where you started.
Yeah, so I don't think the new owner wants me to divulge too much, but I'll say this. There was another company listed right after, or right during when we were selling, and they were doing 15 million in revenue, and their net profit was less than ours, and their sale price was less than what ours was. So I'll say it wasn't necessarily the amount of revenue, but because I could say we were less than that 15 million, but we were more efficient and profitable, and because of that, we were able to fetch better numbers.
Thank you. I love that. And that will help just give context to people. And like, again, we could probably spend another 12 hours just talking about how you scaled and built that business. Did you, like for Lawline, we ended up hiring a coach from Scaling Up to help us create systems and processes similar to EOS, which many people use as well. We went through many iterations of structure and platforming and things like that. Are there lessons that you can just share that come to mind to other legal tech entrepreneurs who are maybe like under $1 million in revenue right now and would love to get to 8 figures in 10 years or less?
Yeah. Yeah. I would say it's not always necessarily about revenue. It's also about profit. And I say that as I'm building a software company that's currently not profitable and is just going for growth, but it's also a different model there. But with certain businesses, revenue numbers can sound really juicy and exciting, but at the end of the day, if it's not profitable, or if it's high in revenue, but high in risk and high in overhead, it doesn't necessarily make it a better business. I have a factoring company that I've started along the way, and
if I could stop you there, less about the revenue, more about the challenge of leading and building a company. Did you need a coach? How did you actually, what systems and processes? Was there anything that just stands out? For me, I would say Scaling Up was the number one thing that transformed us from me giving them 30 ideas a day to creating 3-year priorities, 1-year goals, quarterly rocks. And that helped create structure. Did you need to have a moment like that in your business?
I'm a fan of Gene Wickman's book, and I've read EOS, and have a factoring company that I've helped start, that I've helped them implement it there. And that company last year or the year before did 67 million in total gross. And I attribute a lot of the organization that's happening there now because of that. With me, no, I don't know. They're like how your chaos, non-linear stories that you go by, David, is in a way
How did you compete with these $70 million funded companies at being organically grown?
Yeah, I think just a lot of grit and grinding and willing.
AdWords, though, that's how you got your
a lot of SEO and ranking organically. Ran a little bit of that. We tried some radio. We tried a lot of different things, but just grinding and willing to take calls at the odd hours. I always tell this story. There was a girl who called one time at 3 a.m, and she said, I have this job. I think she was in New York City, and she said, I had a DUI, and there's a mugshot online, and if this shows up at work, like, I'm going to lose my job tomorrow. And I said, we can actually put out a news release, something positive that you've done, and by the time you wake up, it'll be gone. And sure enough, it was buried.
That's a great point. And like, again, we can go 10 hours and lots of different topics. Was the main strategy to overcome the bad, whatever reputation stuff that was out there, to create positive SEO content that eventually that would outrank the other content?
That was the main core of it, and the fact that we did a good job at it was the reason that we were able. And I guess that's maybe the lesson. If you do a really good job and you're obsessive over your clients, that's
in a way you were a content company, right? You were essentially doing SEO for individuals. That's why you were calling it reputation management. it just gives, because in my mind, I'm like, okay, you're reaching out to sites, you're removing different things. Like you can't do that. You're just adding better things because it'll drown it out. I love that. What is the average cost for something like that when back in that time? $500, $1,000?
I would say minimum starting at $1,000.
Okay.
Sometimes they were projects, and sometimes once you resolve the issue, then
You were good. Got it.
were good, and you would try to charge them some sort of maintenance fee, but even that would only last so
Got
long.
it.
And that's why I was
Got
like, wait, privacy software is such a better solution to businesses versus.
Totally. Got it. Okay. So I just got chills for a moment before this where I was just like, wow, like you weren't kidding. You were a car attendant. You worked for 6 months free. I was thinking of the movie The Pursuit of Happiness,
Yeah.
Smith, where he worked for free as a trader and put that out there. You worked for 6 months for free. And that SEO training was essentially the foundation of your business that you sold better than the company that was doing 70 million, that raised $70 million. So that in itself is a huge lesson, to take that risk and put yourself out there, to volunteer for things. And to your point, I'm in YPO with you. I'm on the board. I've been on the board for several years in different roles, and I don't get paid for it. I do it because I love it, but I also do it because it's an opportunity for me to grow different skill sets that I can't in my current business. And maybe that will lead to something someday. Maybe it won't, but I do it because I'm passionate about it. And I really love that. And that's a good networking thing. All right. You sell. You take that 6 months that you advise to other people or no?
So I just read that 2 Mondays ago. I should have read it right after, but I was right on the grind. So I did have a transition period of from January to June, but I already had purchased the Captain Compliance website. I was already mapping things out. I was taking notes. I started attending events and just grinding my teeth, like the due diligence that I was talking about that I recommend to others. If you're a lawyer now and you want to get into legal tech, start going to meetups, start going to events, check out random companies. There's a company called Darrow. Have you heard of Darrow? I was speaking to an attorney the other day, onboarding them for our privacy software. And he was like, oh, there's this really cool software, Darrow. They've reached out to me. They use AI to find potential cases named after Clarence Darrow. And they'll find and say, oh, here's a mislabeling on this nutraceutical packaging. This could be a claim. And then they go and they try to sell those claims to law firms to then file PI claims, and then they attach themselves to the claim. And as an ABS in Arizona, they get a percentage of whatever the case settles for.
That's interesting that you say that, for a couple things. One, what I heard you say is before you actually even sold your business, you already had this idea, correct?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Did you have the name in your mind before you sold it?
So I bought the domain name before I had sold it. And I looked at some other businesses and tried.
That's very rare, right? To your point, I know of many people who sold their businesses and they sell it for a lot of money and they're literally lost because they don't know what to do. And maybe it's not FU money where they can't ever work again, or even if it is, after 6 months or a year, they're like, they need that energy they have to go and they're not sure to start. Was that at all connected to you selling the business? Like you saw a better opportunity and you wanted to put your focus there, or just happened at the same time?
I wanted to put my focus there, but I couldn't take my foot off the gas with the other business. So I was in this stuck place. And part of me says, oh, I could have kept the one business, lost focus on it, and just focused on this. But then that business,
it's a tough decision. You also hear about serial entrepreneurs who have several very successful business, and there's probably a world where you're right. You could have kept that and had the right team and built that up, but maybe you wouldn't have been as aggressive. Like you got to make a decision. Yeah. There's a lot of right decisions to make, and that's the decision you made, and you have a learning from it. And I'm sure, and maybe think about this, because maybe I'll ask you in a few minutes. It's like, you probably learned a lot in the process of trying to sell your business that other people who are thinking about, oh, let's ask it now. Is there anything like in that process of the first time you tried to raise money, it didn't work, and you're going through that could help other people who are trying to sell? And I'll ask the same question. Was there any books that you read that helped you in this process, or how did you hire a company? How did you go about it?
Yeah, I used a consultant initially. I tested the waters with a site called Biz by Sell, right? We go back to classified ads with Craigslist. Somehow these classified ads always end up putting me somewhere. And that's how I ended up meeting this consultant who then ended up handling and dealing with kind of the interested parties in which led to the private equity guy, which then led to, right, to the hiring of the guy in Utah, which then kept cascading. There wasn't a specific book, but I think with me, like just the fact that I was willing to continue to grind, we did get money even initially. Now we have a lot of really big VC funds that are coming to Captain Compliance and they say, we see the traction you're getting, we see what's happening, we're interested. And I think the fact that I'm willing to grind and put in the time and effort, and as we grow, we'll be successful no matter what, whether or not we bring in a lot of capital and funding.
Yeah.
Not. So the same feeling with the reputation company, just the continuous pursuit of grinding and doing right by the clients and figuring out creative ways to solve their problems, which is what we're doing now. We have a big CPG company that just signed up for Captain Compliance, and their attribution was a total mess. And we're putting in the time at our own expense to help them fix this because we know it's going to pay dividends for them and they're going to end up being a client for life.
I think Captain Compliance is a great business. I think it's such a needed business. We've talked about it. You help. So this is where my other question was, what you said before. You help companies, any company, law firms, clients, legal tech companies, make sure that they're data compliant with their website. And is it just based on the website, or is everything, their data, all their data, you have a systems and processes that do it, and you monitor it on a regular basis to make sure they're compliant? But what I heard, correct?
Yeah,
What I
absolutely.
heard you say before, do you also work on the other side and help? Because it sounded like there was a company that you mentioned that goes to law firms to find companies that are not compliant and then sues them. Did you?
That was not on the privacy compliance. That was just in not that was just in general. They find, and that's a startup called Darrow that's raised, I think, 100+ million.
So that's not you're not
I,
involved in
I
that.
have nothing to do with that company. I just thought that
Got
was
it.
a really interesting legal tech.
That makes sense. Yeah, because I don't think it would work be on both sides of the equation.
The intersection of AI and legal tech right now is really incredible. And I don't know if Zach Posner, if we brought him up from LTF.
He was one of my early episodes. I'll be at the conference. I don't know if you'll be there.
TLTF. So I regret not going to the one in Miami last year, but again, as a startup, we got to concentrate on where we
Yeah.
allocate capital in the early stages. But I see just the growth as you've seen in legal tech, and Darrow is one of those many interesting cases. So I would just advise anybody who's a lawyer who wants to get into legal tech, take a look at companies like Darrow that just stand out, that they're doing something unique. Filevine, I think, is another one. Gavel, just all these companies. I was at CleoCon last year, and it was interesting seeing some of these different companies. And then I go and I see how much they've raised and what they're valued at. And I'm like, and then I hear from lawyers. I was at a really big PI law firm's office in South Florida, one of the biggest. And he was like, oh, yeah, we use this and this. I was like, oh, that's so interesting. I just saw them at a conference. So it showed me, all right, they're really starting to get traction. And so I hope Captain Compliance one day is the de facto company for law firms, that we are on every major law firm, PI firm. We're on their site protecting them and letting users know that they respect their privacy choices.
Is your intention to raise money soon?
Yeah, I'm actually presenting at Venture Atlanta next week. One of the YPOs event I was at yesterday at Hudson Yards here in New York City was around the CIO from the San Francisco 49ers was talking about how they have a venture fund. They've raised $49 million, ironically, and it was talking about just the state of the venture world and like where they play in, and that there's so many AI companies there in Silicon Valley that are raising at pre-money $100 million valuations, and those are just beyond what they can do. I was talking a lot about the state of the venture ecosystem now, and I am targeting to do a raise now and use that to just continue fueling our growth. We've really hit some traction. The thesis that I had, and I would say this is a really fulfilling thing for me. My thesis was in 2021 when I first saw about the data privacy B2B world, that right now there's one state, California, with a privacy law. There's GDPR in Europe. All these headlines I kept seeing: Amazon fined hundreds of millions of dollars, Facebook fined billions of dollars, XYZ random company fined even $100,000 for privacy violations. I was like, all right, this is the future. I was looking at other options and businesses that would have been on the other side of compliance. And I was like, I think this is the future. This is where the market's heading. I went to the conferences, I went to meetups. I saw that Colorado and Utah were next in line for creating privacy laws and frameworks for their states. And fast forward now, years later, that all this is coming to fruition. Just the other day, we did a demo for a client and they liked what they saw. They went dark. And then all of a sudden, they got hit with a demand letter from one of those Swigert law firms, right? Who's very common for filing these claims. And they immediately came back and said, all right, now we're ready. Like we got hit. Now we're going to have to pay. So now we're going to have to pay more money than if we had just signed up with you. And so that was very sad for them, but fulfilling knowing like what we're doing is the right direction. We're helping businesses, we're helping companies, we're protecting them. And in the end, we're saving them money in the long term from what they'd have to pay in litigation costs. And it's respecting users' privacy, which is very important too.
I love it. Let me ask you one last question and then we can wrap this up. And I really appreciate you sharing your insights. Is the second time around, and I know it's not your second company, but the second company that's large that we're building on, is it easier than it was with Profile Defenders? Yeah, I'll just stop there. Is it easier or how is it different?
Different, very different. Last one was very lifestyle business, which is great in some ways. I'm like, I miss the lifestyle business. I literally traveled the world. I've been to every continent except for Antarctica. I've been to 49 out of 50 states. It was easy. People would just fall in my lap all the time. And it was a good lifestyle business. It was fun. I had my run. This one's very different, much more capital intensive, but this one's very sticky. We haven't lost a single client since we've started signing up clients over 14 months ago. That was unheard of in my last business. There was always a hole in my boat. There was always a leak that I was patching. This one, we're very sticky. We are absolutely solving people's needs, businesses' needs. That is quantifiable. And it's more difficult this time around, actually, I would say, because this one is both more expensive to build. It's the last business was profitable literally from day one, never had a negative month in its entirety. This one more expensive, have a family now, have more expenses. Everything's also a lot more expensive today to build than it was in 2011.
I'm going to ask you a real question.
Yeah.
There must have been a moment, and maybe it comes and goes depending on your mood, with regret, where
of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because what you just mentioned before, so to some, Lawline is definitely not a lifestyle business, but I do have the freedom. It is a turnkey business and you can't just set and forget it. But traveling is my family's thing as well. We moved to Barcelona for 2 years and we have the freedom to do that. And I struggle with this myself because I want to continue to push myself out of my comfort zone. And maybe I hit the wall, and maybe I didn't. And we're launching a new product, and I think we're doing great things. But I go back and forth there. So I appreciate you, one, for saying yes right away, like that exists. Then after that regret, I'm sure there's a moment where you're like, what? What do you say to yourself when you have those moments of regret? And then we'll leave it on that. We'll end on that note.
Yeah, no, it comes across all the time. I had a great life. I'm working exponentially harder here. I'm putting in the time and effort, but I know the overall long-term gain and long-term value for doing this versus with the other business, the upside was limited. Here it's unlimited upside. We could be talking generational wealth. There's a company in our space that's looks like it's about to sell for $1.8 billion. There's in talks, it'll probably be officially announced next week. That was never happening in the PR space. That's motivating, that's exciting, and this is scalable at the end of the day. My goal, my vision is everywhere we go, you can look around, whether it's the grocery store, you're walking through the city and you're looking at brands and you're saying, oh, that's a client of ours, that's a client of ours, they're using Captain Compliance, they're using us. So that's my long-term vision and the possibility here. And it's already starting to happen on a small scale. I'll go to the grocery store and I'll say, oh, Midday Squares, that's a client of ours, or here's another client of ours in this aisle. That's really motivating and exciting to me. And that's one of the many things that keeps me going and grinding and working on this every day.
Chart, that was inspiring. Really was. Thank you for taking us through your journey. You didn't have to do that. It's maybe painful and exciting at the same time for you to go through this. You have done so much and you're now, like you said, on to something so much bigger and so much more potential, but more risk that you do that. And that's what the purpose of being an entrepreneur is. So anybody who's gotten this far or has seen different parts of this, I know you got value. So thank you for that. And Chart, thank you for once again speaking with me. If you could stay on for a second after we say goodbye, I will have one more thing to share with you and then bid everyone else adieu. Thank you again.
Thank you, David.